Now we begin Chapter 2. This picture is from Shenzhen, China, and the title says it all. Time is money, efficiency is life. We economists believe that efficiency is the ultimate goal, and our golden rule states that every action should continue until the additional benefit of more would fall below the additional cost. Our calculations of efficiency are not just about money, but they are about happiness, either utility or social welfare. In this chapter, we look at measures of efficiency and how economists and the economist tools of supply and demand. Finally, we discuss expected value calculations. Okay, scrutinizing efficiency. The ultimate standard is something called Pareto efficiency. If no additional change can make one person better off than the other worse off, then one has achieved Pareto efficiency. And up to that point, there are opportunities for exchange to make both parties better off. Now the division of benefits is another matter. There are three basic standards. First off, utilitarian goal. Utilitarian is to maximize the sum of everyone's utility. Utility, by the way, is a arbitrary and slightly subjective measure of happiness that we economists have devised from the days of John Stuart Mill back in the 19th century. So it's our standard measure of happiness, shall we say, and they can be measured in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth utils. Okay, so utilitarian. Egalitarian goal is to divide the utilitarian benefits equally. And finally, the Rawlsian goal is to maximize the benefits of the least well-off person. Okay. Now we have a landfill, and we have two groups of landowners, high and low income. Standard efficiency analysis would put the landfill in the low income areas if the benefits of putting it outweigh the costs. In essence, if the high income people could, in essence, pay off the low income people and put the landfill in their location. So benefits outweigh the costs, put the landfill there. But there are, of course, other considerations. Number one, creation and distribution of net benefits. Who gets them? Who gets the benefits that are given out to the by putting the landfill in there. For example, 30 relocated families may not receive adequate compensation for their emotional and financial costs of moving. So it may not be exactly that the low income people are compensated. And there can be a sense of place and utility that can arrive not just from the willingness to pay, but from a sense of place itself. So folks may feel, let's say, on the leeward side, that they love and like the leeward side, and they cannot be bribed, in essence, to have a landfill be placed there on the leeward side. And efficiency matters are anthropocentric. They're basically human-based. We look at efficiency are considered in terms of their values to humans. For example, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officials consider human interests in the endangered San Francisco garter snake when placing limits on the expansion of the local train service. But they did not consider the animals' interests. So efficiency, although that kind of sounds like a silly example, efficiency is based upon the impact on humans, not necessarily on other living things. Now, given these limitations, we economists still embrace efficiency as an important first step in maximizing the pie to be divided. Okay. Now, cost-benefit analysis. Should we save this whale at all costs? Here's our picture of a whale. It looks like an orca, and this is a big question. The best outcome for society is neither boundless production nor zero pollution. Either extreme would not be good for society. Remember, to live is to pollute. By our being, we are in a way polluting the environment. The key, though, is not looking at the total benefits and costs, total pollution versus not, but looking at incremental changes. The idea is to pursue the policy if the extra benefit is greater than the extra cost. If the EPA had looked at extra benefits and costs of the Clean Air Act, the results would have been a richer and more efficient picture. Okay, so here is some pictures from the book on an economist's way of visualizing the efficient quantities of whales to be harvested. So the right amount of whales to harvest. This is looking at marginal benefits and costs. And the marginal benefit of harvesting whales decreases as one harvests more whales. There are enough lab samples, people are satiated with getting that extra whale, and so the extra benefit decreases. That's why the marginal benefit curve is going down. However, also, the marginal cost increases as one harvests more whales. Harvesting too many whales can leave populations of whale prey unchecked. So if you harvest that many more whales, you're opening the door for the animals that the whales themselves are preying upon. You're overpopulating. And it's like taking away deer predators, and you're left with an overpopulation of deer. Now, by pursuing where marginal benefit is the extra marginal benefit is equal to the extra marginal cost, maximizes the total benefit of harvesting whales vis-a-vis their total cost by looking at an efficiency standard. Okay, I'm going to end things right here. Okay, this is part 2 of chapter 2, and in this section we're going to look at some definitions of efficiency. Now, first of all, here is something that you hopefully remember from micro or macro called the production possibilities frontier. It shows the available range of possible outcomes that are efficient between having bear habitat and snowmobile paths. And the opportunity cost looks at two things, and it looks at two things simultaneously. It looks at the trade-offs between bear habitat and snowmobile habitat. So the more habitat you have for bears, the less you'll have for snowmobiles. And then simultaneously, it looks at the increasing opportunity cost of creating more bear habitat at the cost of snowmobile habitat, and vice versa. So if you look at the picture here, as you see at the very top, as you're wanting to get more bears and more bear paths at the very top there, 0 bears and some positive number of snowmobile paths. The more you open up the available snowmobile paths for more bears, the opportunity cost of the next bear is not that great in terms of snowmobile paths. But the opportunity in the process, I'm just reading from his book here. In the process of providing snowmobile paths, the opportunity cost will be minimized by starting with resources that are better suited for snowmobiles than for pairs. The first land designated for snowmobile paths will be far from rugged bear country and might have existing hiking trails with little need for maintenance and infrastructure. Um, Likewise, the first land set aside for bears will be in forested backcountry where rocks and streams will make life difficult for snowmobiles but wonderful for bears. So at the beginning, you're going to be using land that is better for bears and not for snowmobiles. So by you know, in essence, saving more bears, you're not giving up that much in terms of snowmobiles. However, the opportunity cost of each good will increase as more territory is converted from one type of use to the other. Each additional mile of snowmobile path must encroach into increasing pristine wilderness areas, displacing more bears, and vice versa. So as you look further on the production possibilities frontier, to say the 17th bear is going to give you a bigger cost in terms of snowmobiles, and vice versa. If you want to save that extra snowmobile path, it's going to cost you a lot in terms of bears. This is because the land for snowmobiles and for bears is not the same. It's specialized, and and so the opportunity cost increases as you go from one extreme to the other. If it wasn't this way, that line that you see there would be a straight line, not a curved, bowed out line. The curved, bowed out line shows this idea of the law of increasing opportunity cost. Certainly, this is something that we went over in both the macro and the microeconomics classes. Okay, on to our next slide. And our next slide says, are we efficient actually in real life? Well, sometimes yes, many times we're not. Now, if one is parking and perhaps parking illegally, this could actually be approaching an efficient calculation because one may be looking at the cost of getting the ticket or the expectation of the cost of getting the ticket, and if the benefit is greater than the cost, then parking may actually be a relatively efficient thing to do. You're playing the odds, as it were. Criminals, though, can overestimate the efficient level of their crime, of criminal activity. One may engage in more criminal activity without really looking at the actual cost or the probability of the cost. The overestimation of the benefits was going to far outweigh the costs, and so criminals may do one last score or one last burglary, and not realizing that the cost of their actions is going up and up and up, and their benefits are going down, down, down. Now, marginal costs are understood firsthand, but oftentimes quickly forgotten. People, when they are when they're going to be doing an action, they may say never again in terms of experiencing the marginal cost of doing a difficult activity, but they may forget that the cost that they encountered and go do the action again. I think gamblers would understand that very well. Now, federal air quality standards oftentimes didn't take a compliance cost into account, so looking strictly at the benefits of increased air quality without looking at what it takes to get there. But efficiency is still a standard to strive for, though, and it's not something that's going to be achieved perfectly, but it is a standard that we try to measure activities by. Okay, now two other forms of efficiency. One is called productive efficiency, which is how the goods should be produced. And productive efficiency is the rate at which one input can be substituted for another. The rate at which one input can be substituted for another is the same for the production of either good. And there's the hydroponic plant example in the book. And the hydroponic example illustrates that the allocation of resources, workers in greenhouses, is inefficient if one input can be substituted for another, thus there would be an increase in production if you did that. Therefore, you would be inside the frontier. Remembering that being inside the frontier is going to be inefficient, on the frontier is going to be efficient, and outside the frontier is going to be inefficient. Now we have another standard of efficiency called distribution efficiency. And this is for whom we should produce. If the parties can achieve a greater outcome through trading, then they are approaching this standard of efficiency. And the tuberculosis treatments and the malaria treatments between Kenya and Tanzania. The TB treatment example illustrates the idea of distributive efficiency. In this case, we are talking about final goods and services as opposed to inputs. If Kenya and Tanzania can trade TB treatments and malaria treatments with each other and both parties are made better off, then allocation is not yet efficient. So both cases show that there's a limit to exchange when both parties can be made better off, and this limit is called efficiency. Okay, this ends the second portion of Chapter 2. Okay, this is our third and final section for Chapter 2. And this section goes into demand and supply. Hopefully this is a review, and something a little new called expected value. So you see in front of you the demand curve. So behold, there is the demand curve. As you remember, the demand curve shows the inverse relationship between price and quantity demand. It's inverse because as the price goes down, one is willing to buy more of the item. In this case, the item is pads of paper. And as the price goes up, one is willing to buy less. Now, the demand curve is downward sloping. Like I said before, it's inverse. But in this case, we have something called a step function as opposed to continuous. Why is it a step function? Well, it's a step function because we're talking about single unit quantities of paper in relation to single unit changes in the price. So it's going to be a step. Let's say we're at I don't know, $3, and you're buying one pad of paper. As you can see, let's see if I can move the. No, I guess I can't. I guess I can't. $3, and you're buying one pad of paper. Now, and you're going to buy one to two. But then if I drop the price to $2, I'm going to be buying two things of paper there. So you're going to be buying one all the way up to two at $3. But in order to get that person to buy that second quantity of pads, it's going to go down to $2. Okay. Now we have a new concept that's called consumer surplus. Now, a consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer would pay and what they would actually pay. So let's say here the actual stated price is going to be $2.50, and you're going to be buying 2 units at $2.50. But then I would have bought a single unit at $5. So that whole green area would be the consumer surplus. I would have bought it at 5 or 4 or some number of 5 and 3, but I'm actually getting it at 250. So I'm gaining. It's kind of a psychological game, but still there is a sense of gain, and that gain is called consumer surplus. Now, the market demand curve is merely the summation of the individual demand curves. Now, when we look at the market demand curve, as you'll see in a couple of slides, it will no longer be a step function, it'll be continuous because it's a summation of all the individual people who are buying that particular product, aka it's the market. Okay, now we have the supply curve. And here we have a supply curve along with two friends known as marginal cost and average variable cost. Now, the supply curve shows the positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied of the good. It's the exact analogous thing to the demand curve, but now the supply curve is from the point of view of the producer. And production with the average variable cost curve. Your author is showing here that that the firm will only produce if the price is above the average variable cost curve. So if the firm can still pay its workers its variable cost, then it will continue to produce. If the price falls below the variable cost, then the firm will not produce. Hence the the supply is that green line above average variable cost, and that's the only thing that matters. And remember also that firms produce along the marginal cost curve. If you remember from the perfect competition chapter, those of you who took microeconomics with me, that is going to be the firm supply curve. It's going to be that marginal cost curve above the average variable cost curve, at least in what we would call the short run. Now there's an analogous term to consumer surplus, and that is producer surplus, and that's the difference between the price and what is produced. If a firm is producing something at a certain cost and they're getting a higher price, that is going to be the producer surplus. Now, firms should produce up to the point where the marginal cost equals the price, similar to that for the consumer. Okay, now we bring them all together. We have market equilibrium. And market equilibrium is where supply curve meets the demand curve. We assume that the consumer consumes up to the limit and the producer does the same. And I don't know if your author went into this or not. I don't think he did. But if the price is above market equilibrium, then there's going to be a surplus, and that's going to bring down the price. And if the price is below the market equilibrium, there's going to be a shortage, and so there's going to be an inevitable moving up on the price as well. Now, market equilibrium brings marginal benefit and marginal cost together to yield an efficient level of output. Alrighty. So that's just looking at the market and demand, and the market does ensure some degree of efficiency because consumers are looking for the best deal possible, and firms are looking for the best deal possible as well, and costs and benefits are known to both parties. Okay, so we have one more slide here, and it's expected value calculations. And your author talks about the case of Hurricane Harvey in the year 2017, and Hurricane Harvey, and actually another hurricane, Hurricane Joyce. Um, and he talks about this woman named Julie who who was making some hypothetical calculations, and Julie was in, oh, where was Julie? Oh yeah, in Saint Lucia, and Julie was kind of waiting out Hurricane Joyce, and Hurricane Joyce just missed the island of Saint Lucia. And so, as Julie states at 12:30 p.m., Julie states the good news. It's another beautiful sunny day here. Looks like lucky Saint Lucia will continue its streak of missing storms. But now what to do with all this bottled water? Unfortunately, in 2017, the good citizens of Texas and Puerto Rico did not escape the jaws of Hurricane Harvey. Now, one can actually do a mathematical equation and come up with something known as expected value. And expected value is equals, for each possible outcome, the probability times the value of the outcome. And as you can see there, expected value is equal to the probability of the outcome times the value you put on that outcome, and so forth. Now, what does this mean for decision making? Well, first, let me explain a little bit about this calculation. Expected value is a way of estimating benefits and costs based on probabilities and different possible outcomes. In the textbook case, the expected value of water for Julie depends upon her subjective probability of the hurricane coming with force versus a minor loss or even no loss. Now, just to read from the book here, and looking at Julie's case, she estimates that there would be a 5% chance of the hurricane truly hitting, and she values water at $1,000. So that would be the first probability of water, and a probability of 5%. So that would be the first. And then we have the probability of outcome 2, which would be a 15% chance that only minor supply lines would be cut. And for these reasons, Julie would be willing to pay $100 to avoid the relatively minor loss of water. So you would multiply the 15% times the $100 for that particular outcome. And then finally, she estimates that there would be an 80% chance that there would be no outcome, there would be no hurricane whatsoever, and that would be times 0, because there would be she wouldn't be willing to pay any money to avoid that outcome. It would be, let's see how they state it here. Yeah, 80%. So she would be paying, 80% chance of no damage times the 0 value of bottled water when running water is essentially available. So she's not willing to pay for the water because the water is already there. Now you multiply all these together, and as you see in the book, you have a value of $65. So Julie should compare the expected value of bottled water with the cost of bottled water when deciding whether or not to make the purchase. So her expected value is 65, and that would be that's how she would value water if any of the hurricane outcomes were to occur. If water was available that was less than $65, then she should make the purchase, because her expected value would be greater than the cost. The benefit would outweigh the cost. But if the cost was greater than $65, then Julie should not make the purchase. Now, of course, this all depends upon Julie's subjective valuation of how much she would be willing to pay and her subjective probabilities of what she thinks would happen. And of course, one can make wrong calculations, as was stated in the reality check that your author has for the need for valuing a life, and especially the Ford Pinto example. Ford obviously had a valuation that was much, much less than the actual cost, so they should have invested a bit more money relative to um, uh, relative to what they did. They really lost out. But at least expected value is a way of calculating this in terms of probabilities. Okay, that ends the show for chapter 2. This ends the third section of chapter 2.